For a long time, we have known that plastic pollution is a major problem for our oceans. My colleagues and I at the University of Plymouth have studied this issue for more than 20 years. We have seen how larger pieces of plastic break down into smaller and smaller bits, creating what we call microplastics. These tiny fragments have been found in seafood, salt, and even drinking water. But now we have uncovered a new, more hidden threat. We have found evidence of even smaller particles known as nanoplastics inside the very vegetables we grow in the soil and eat every day. This is a significant moment in our understanding of plastic pollution. The discovery that nanoplastics can enter our vegetables is a world first. These particles are incredibly small, often less than 1/1,000,000th of a centimeter, because they are so tiny they can behave in ways that larger plastics cannot. This new research, published in September 2025 in the journal, shows a direct pathway for these plastics to move from the environment into the food we consider healthy. It means that plastic contamination is not just an issue for our seas and the animals that live there. It has now found its way into our farms and gardens, raising serious questions about the purity of our plant-based foods. This finding changes how we must think about the entire journey of our food, from the farm to our plates. Previously, many people believed that plants might be safe from this kind of pollution. We thought that their natural root systems would filter out harmful materials. However, our study proves this is not always the case with nanoparticles. They are small enough to get past the plant's natural barriers. This means that every time we eat a salad or a cooked vegetable, we could be unknowingly consuming these microscopic plastic intruders along with the vitamins and nutrients we need to stay healthy. The sources of these nanoplastics are all around us in our modern world. They come from the everyday things we use without a second thought. When car tires wear down on the road, they release tiny particles into the air and soil. When we wash our synthetic clothes, millions of plastic fibers wash away into the water systems. Even the paint on our buildings and the breakdown of larger plastic waste contribute to this invisible cloud of pollution. These particles settle on the land and get mixed into the soil, creating a permanent reservoir of contamination that our crops are now absorbing. To find out if plants could absorb nanoplastics, our team designed a careful experiment. We decided to use radishes because they grow quickly and have a large edible root that we could easily test. We grew these radishes in a controlled setting using hydroponics, which means they were grown in water instead of soil. This allowed us to precisely manage what the plants were exposed to. We then added very small polystyrene nanoparticles to the water. These are a common type of plastic, and we used particles that were small enough to be considered nanoplastics. It was a crucial step to ensure our test was realistic. Making these tiny plastic particles visible was the biggest challenge. Because they are so small, you cannot see them with a normal microscope. To track them, we used a special technique. The nanoplastics we used were tagged with something called radio-labeled carbon. This tag acts like a tiny beacon, allowing our scientific instruments to detect the plastic's presence and measure how much of it was there. This method gave us clear and undeniable proof of where the plastic went. We let the radishes grow in this plastic-laced water for a period of 5 days, giving them enough time to absorb nutrients and potentially the plastic particles. After the 5-day growth period, we carefully harvested the radishes. Our team then analyzed the different parts of the plant: the roots, the edible fleshy part, and the leaves. The results were quite startling. We found that the plants had absorbed a significant amount of the nanoplastics from the water. In total, nearly 5% of the nanoplastics we had introduced into the system were taken up by the roots. This confirmed our hypothesis that plants could indeed pull these particles out of their environment. The nanoplastics were no longer just in the water. They had successfully entered the biological system of the plant. The analysis showed us exactly where the plastic ended up inside the radish plants. We found millions of nanoplastic particles had accumulated in the roots, which were in direct contact with the contaminated water. More worryingly, the plastic did not stay there. We discovered that about 25% of the absorbed particles had moved further up into the edible, fleshy part of the radish, the part people eat. Then additionally, about 10% of the plastics had traveled all the way up to the leaves. This was clear evidence that nanoplastics could move throughout the entire plant system, contaminating every part of it. One of the most important findings from our study was how the nanoplastics managed to get inside the plants in the first place. Plant roots have a natural defense mechanism called the Casparian strip. You can think of it as a gatekeeper or filter. It is a waterproof layer of cells in the root that blocks harmful substances from entering the plant's vascular system, which is like its bloodstream, while allowing water and essential nutrients to pass through. For a long time, it was assumed that this barrier would effectively stop particles like plastics from getting inside. Our research has shown this assumption to be incorrect when it comes to nanoparticles. Our experiment provided the first concrete evidence that nanoplastics are small enough to bypass the Casparian strip. This is a game-changing discovery. It means that the natural protective systems that plants have evolved over millions of years may not be effective against this very modern type of pollutant. Lead author Dr. Nathaniel Clark, a key member of our team, pointed out that this is probably not something that only happens in radishes. It is very likely that many other types of plants are also vulnerable to this form of contamination. The fundamental structure of plant roots is similar across many species, so this hidden pathway is likely widespread. Once the nanoplastics get past this initial barrier, they enter the xylem. The xylem is the network of tubes that transports water and nutrients from the roots all the way up to the leaves. Our study showed that the nanoplastics were carried along with the flow of water, distributing them throughout the entire plant. This explains why we found particles in the edible radish bulb and even in the leaves. The plastic becomes an unwanted passenger in the plant's own internal transport system, reaching every part of the organism, from the deepest root to the highest leaf. This new understanding of how plastics move through plants has profound implications. It suggests that simply washing your vegetables may not be enough to remove this type of contaminant. If the plastic is inside the plant's tissues, it is impossible to wash away. It has become part of the vegetable itself. This means that our exposure to these materials could be continuous and unavoidable if we are eating crops grown in contaminated environments. The plastic particles are locked inside the food, waiting to be passed on to whoever eats it, whether that is an animal or a person. This discovery opens up a completely new chapter in the story of plastic pollution and its impact on life. For years, the focus has been on plastics in our oceans and the danger to marine animals. We have talked a lot about microplastics in fish and shellfish. Our work now provides clear evidence that plastic particle contamination is not just a marine issue, it is a terrestrial one too. It directly affects our agriculture and the safety of the vegetables we rely on for a healthy diet. This has global implications, as plastic pollution is a problem that affects every country on Earth, from industrial nations to remote farming communities. The potential risks to human health are a major concern. Nanoplastics are small enough to pass from our digestive system into our bloodstream. From there, they could travel to different organs in our body, accumulate in our cells, and maybe even cross protective barriers like the one that shields a developing fetus. The long-term effects of this are still unknown, which is why more research is so urgently needed. We are now faced with a new pathway for exposure, where plastics enter our bodies not just through water or seafood, but through staple foods like root vegetables, leafy greens, and other crops. This issue also affects the wider food chain. If crops are absorbing nanoplastics, then farm animals that eat those crops, such as hay or corn, could also be accumulating plastic particles in their bodies. This means the plastic could be passed up the food chain, from plants to livestock, and then to humans who consume meat and dairy products. It creates a cycle of contamination that is very difficult to break. Because these particles are almost impossible to detect and remove from biological tissues, the problem is likely to grow over time as more plastic breaks down in the environment. Moving forward, it is critical that we expand this research. We need to understand how different types of crops absorb nanoplastics. Do leafy greens take up more than root vegetables? Does the type of soil matter? We also need to investigate the long-term health risks of a diet that contains these tiny plastic fragments. Our study at the University of Plymouth has opened the door to a new field of science. It's a serious warning that we must act to reduce plastic pollution at its source, because it is now clear that it can find its way into the very heart of our food supply.